I'm a natural planner and organiser. Everyone in the family knows I need a project to be planning, otherwise they might just become my next project. So when I'm in my element, be it planning global adventures, charity fundraisers or work projects, I love taking an idea and turning it into reality, making the impossible possible. Maybe it's just the certainty of projects. You have a clear objective to achieve. The key milestones are mapped out and you oversee progress, tweaking and adjusting to navigate blocks, but always having the end goal in sight. Throughout the project, everything is under control. So you can imagine how I felt when I was diagnosed with incurable cancer, prognosis unknown. In that moment, with those few words, I lost control of my life, control that was the essence of me. I was suddenly absorbed into a national health system that controlled pretty much every aspect of my life. There were tests, scans, appointments, treatments, nurse visits, physio, repeat. There was no time or energy to think for myself. Initially, it was a relief to relinquish control, to not have to make decisions. I was in shock, unable to process anything that was happening to me. I had joined a club I didn't want to be a part of, the Cancer Club. My knee-jerk reaction was to avoid anything that associated me with cancer. That included discussion forums and support groups. I kept myself as busy as I could to avoid difficult conversations, mainly with myself. I was well and truly in denial. A few months into treatment, and it felt like I'd lost my identity. The realization that not only had I lost control, but nothing would ever be the same again hit hard. Even if I did get some form of control over my future back, it would be very different from the future I'd envisaged, and thus the anger and frustration kicked in. My treatment was successful. I'd responded well to the chemotherapy. This was fantastic news, but it left me feeling even less in control. With chemotherapy, surgery and radiotherapy finished, I no longer had the safety net of the national health system and was left to navigate my own way back to normality. But my new normal was full of uncertainty, living with incurable cancer, never sure if or when it might start growing again or spread to another organ. With such an uncertain future, I felt vulnerable, but didn't know what to do about it, so I pretended everything was back to normal. Fake it till you make it, right? Well, you can only fake it for so long. 10 months after my diagnosis, I was back at work, striving to define my new normal. However, everything felt overwhelming. Work were great, very supportive, and put me on a long phased return to work. I started planning my social life, making up for lost time with weekends abroad, theatre trips and dinners out. The more I tried to recreate normality, the more overwhelming everything felt. My head was so full of unprocessed thoughts, it was fit to burst. I was struggling to find meaning. I was offered counselling during my treatment, and I agreed, as that's what I thought I should do. However, I stopped after a few sessions as I quickly realised it wasn't working. How could I talk about the impact of cancer and loss of control when I was in denial? It took me 18 months to get to the point where I was ready to talk, to process everything in my head. My identity had been lost and I no longer knew who I was or what my values were. To top it off, how could I make plans when my life was so full of uncertainty? I slowly started to process everything that had happened, put it in perspective and explore options. I no longer felt like a rabbit in headlights, running scared to try and fit as much in as possible before an imaginary deadline. I've started to focus on what I can control rather than what I can't. I've begun the process of accepting my diagnosis and huge life change and seeing it as a challenge rather than a threat. While my future is still uncertain, I feel like I'm finally gaining control of the things I can control. For many of us, lockdown and COVID-19 have sent us on an emotional roller coaster journey. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross researched responses to grief and change in the 1960s and identified 5 key stages: denial, anger, depression, experiment, and finally acceptance. It's completely normal for us to fluctuate between these feelings. It's how we react to change, to losing control, to uncertainty. And it's not just global pandemics that set our emotions off. Any uncertainty, health issues, unexpected expenses, or redundancy can be a trigger. It's up to us to recognize that this is happening, give ourselves the permission to feel the way we do, and try to keep things in perspective. One of the best pieces of advice I've been given was to go to the balcony. Going to the balcony is a little like getting hindsight immediately. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by the lack of control, take yourself out of the situation. Looking down on it from a neutral perspective, the balcony, you can identify the things you can and can't control. When you know you can't control something, you can stop fighting it and focus on the things you can control. With the clarity of the balcony perspective, Stephen Covey's circles of influence and control can further identify what we can actually control. Here's a list of my worries. They're all part of the circle of concern. Some of these things I can influence. I can have an impact or effect, but I can't guarantee the result. These things go in the circle of influence. Finally, some of these things I can directly control. My actions, my behaviours, my mood, decisions and habits, my work ethic. These things go in the smallest circle, the circle of control. These are the things I should focus my time and energy on. I invite you to create your own circle of control and influence. Start by writing down all the circumstances, worries, and problems that are bothering you. Decide which things you can actively control. These and only these things go in your circle of control. Focus on what you can change, not what you can't. Once you've completed this activity, I invite you to go to the balcony and get a fresh perspective on these things in your circle of control.